and welcome to 3Q, where I interview industry professionals for just 15 minutes by asking three powerful questions. I'm your host, Rachel Vogel, and joining us tonight is Chris Lakey, Senior Vice President of Global Creative Sync at Kobalt Music Publishing. Being with the company since 2008, Chris and his teams have placed Kobalt music and writers in some of the biggest and most notable films, television shows, advertising campaigns, and video games. Prior to this, he worked in the sync department at Universal Music Publishing. So, Chris, I'm excited to have you on. How are you?
I'm good. Just lining up this, actually starting this week, I should say. But yeah, everything's good.
Well, with that, are you ready to get into question one? Imagine for a second you're sitting down with your 25-year-old self. What one piece of advice would you give him on a personal note? And what one piece of advice would you give him from a business perspective?
I would say on a personal note, I would say don't be afraid to make mistakes, and just always take from any experience something from it, because you're going to need it later in the future. That's something all of us could kind of just use, and even something that I think about now. I kind of say like every exit is an entry somewhere. So every situation is a bit of an opportunity. And then I would say business wise, just to continue to learn, because the business is continuing to change. So it doesn't matter how high up you are, what your title is, or how, I guess, low on a totem pole you are. You can always continue to learn. There's always going to be new learning in the industry in general, or in your specific part of the industry. I mean, if I just think about myself at 25, even things like TikTok didn't exist, even things like Spotify didn't exist. So there's just having to continue to learn about things of that nature, but then just also just the nature of the business and how it's changing. So
Totally. So you've been in the publishing space for quite a while. What led you to get into that initially? Was that always what you wanted to do?
No, actually, when I was in college, I'd interned everywhere, and I kind of used it as an opportunity to find out what I didn't want to do. Because I sort of looked at it as though, well, if I don't like this internship, I can stop it. At least I have school to fall back on. So I may as well, experiment with that while I still am in school. And then it was in my junior year, I got an internship at Universal Music Publishing in their sync department. I'm not gonna lie, I didn't really even know what that encompassed, but it, having interned there and sort of seeing what the sync business was, I really enjoyed it, because just the way that I am just in general, I'm very like left brain, right brain. So I got to exercise the creative part of the industry, but I also got to really learn this nuanced part of the industry in terms of like the business of sync. So
Awesome. All right, moving right along. Question two. Every industry has its dirty little secrets, and you and I both know that it's no different in the music industry. And sometimes people think that's a bad thing, but that's not always the case. Sometimes they can be good. What's one secret you would like to share with our listeners about the industry?
Specifically, as it comes to music, any music you hear, somebody's getting paid for it.
True.
Even within the industry, people don't really realize that. I mean, you walk into a mall and you hear music, somebody's getting paid. A songwriter is getting paid for that. Obviously, if you're watching TV show or film and you hear music, someone's getting paid for that. I think that it's not a dirty little secret. I actually think it's a secret that's sort of right in front of our faces, but people in general don't really realize that, and people within the industry don't really realize that. So, one thing as it pertains to my job is making sure that there is that value to music, whatever it may be. But usually it's monetarily, basically because you may think the music in a store is corny that you always go in and listen to, but that is actually someone's livelihood and income. So, and to an extent, it is their art. So they need to be paid for that. So yeah, it's weird. It's like one of those things, not seeing the forest from the trees, because it's like really right in front of you. But a lot of people really don't realize that music isn't free. And
Mm.
yeah, so I guess that it would be the quote unquote dirty little secret.
Yeah, that's not something that people usually think about. So you mentioned music being played in stores, and I know that you've placed music in video games and advertising campaigns. So what is kind of the process behind getting a song placed into a store? I'm sure many people don't know the answer to that.
Yeah, so getting music placed into stores is very different than say like films that I work on or TV shows or games. A lot of times stores, especially if they're chains, will outsource and use music libraries that sort of pertain to the vibe and ethos that the store has, and they would just pay sort of like a blanket fee to be able to sort of use those songs. Um,
Mm.
so that's very different than using this trying to find or getting songs used in film and TV shows, where that's a little bit more of a process because you're dealing with directors and producers and music supervisors and production companies on whatever the creative narrative that they're setting with the actual picture, and then on my end trying to find music that enhances those scenes or shows a different characteristic in that scene that the director's trying to convey. And then outside of that creative part, there's the whole back end of like negotiating fees and whatnot
Mm.
for that actual use.
Is there any specific placement that you've done, let's say in the last year, that really stands out to you?
Yeah, actually, most recently, it's a movie that the movie is coming out. It's in limited theaters now, but it's coming out globally. It's called Till. It's about it's about the Emmett Till story, but it's really about his mother and her sort of journey within this entire story. And it's the story of Emmett Till is very important in American history and so in the civil
Mhm.
rights era. Anyway, our artist Jasmine Sullivan did an original song for the end title.
Oh, wow.
So yeah, for me it's I mean, I've done placements in films that made a lot of money and we've made a lot of money off of them. But for me, things that I really gravitate towards are sort of projects, or that I really love, are projects that I think sort of will live forever or mean something to me or to society, and sort
Mhm.
of those things that sort of like lives forever. So yeah, I was just really proud to be a part of that movie and that process.
Well, can't wait to see it. Final question. Here we go. Throughout your career, I can only imagine you've been asked plenty of questions, whether for an industry conference, the media, or even a promotion. But throughout all those interviews and all those questions, I'll bet there was one that you've never been asked but would have liked to. So, what is that question and what would be your answer?
Hmm. I really don't know. I guess it's really not a question that hasn't been asked, but I think it's a perspective that I think people know, but I don't know what the right way of forming the question would be. But in it, to the extent that people have to remember that the music business is a business, and it being a business is not a bad thing. I always
Mhm.
say that it's called the music business, not the music. So I think that there's I think that the two words music and business, people see them as sort of like butting heads. But actually, I'm a big believer in, I love art. I love people who create art just to create it. I love people who just go off and do whatever they want to do. Like any art, I really do respect. But I also respect that like people need to live and that there needs to be an actual like monetary value on art. And it's okay if you're doing art just to make money. And it's okay if you're doing art to make a better society. And it's okay if you're doing art strictly because you want to buy a new car. So all of these things to me have sort of have a blurred line between all of them. So I don't know what that question would be, but this is just sort of a perspective that I sometimes would like people to embrace a little bit more, that the business of music
Mhm.
and I guess art in general is actually kind of like a beautiful thing,
Yeah.
because it allows people to
Yeah.
live and it allows people to do more art. So it's
Mhm.
like art begets art. And this is like a mechanism in our sort of society, I guess, to allow people to do so. So
Totally. Yeah. And I think that's on like every level from the artists to writers they create, and even the executives, the work that you do, you're kind of creating your own art in a way. So,
From people who build the microphones to people
exactly.
who fine tune studios. It's like we're all part of this ecosystem, and this ecosystem, the only way that it can run is that there needs to be like a business behind it. And I always say, and I tell artists that I work with, like, I'm as passionate about this business aspect of music as they are in creating the actual art. So, I don't take it for granted. I see it sort of as an art. I see it as like a fun puzzle to kind of like work through. But at the end of the day, it's like what I do, I think, is important because it does allow artists to continue to sort of do their art.
Mhm. Speaking of physical art, you can't hear this listening, but I see a really cool piece of art behind you.
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah. I actually, my wife is a art consultant, art advisor.
Oh,
So
wow.
we collect, we have like 60 pieces in our house right now. I think we're supposed to get one today too. So yeah, we're very much into that world.
That's awesome. Well, Chris, it has been so great having you tonight. I appreciate you taking the time to chat with me. And to all of my listeners, I know you enjoyed hearing from Chris just as much as I enjoyed speaking with him. So stay tuned for next week's episode of 3Q, where I interview industry professionals for just 15 minutes by asking three powerful questions. See you next time.